Hello everyone, this is Mr. Simone and I'm here to review for you the first long essay question that we will complete in class, known as the LEQs. So the topic for this one is going to be religious freedom in the British colonies. And here is the exact prompt that I will offer you. Analyze the extent to which religious freedom existed in the British North American colonies between 1607 and 1750. Now, this is the year 2017 through 2018, and the College Board has yet again changed the rubrics that we will use to grade this essay. So what I did for you is basically took from the College Board the 6-point rubric that'll be used for the LEQ. And the first point will be the same. You need to create a thesis or a claim. What historically defensible thesis are you going to use to respond to this prompt? The thesis can be either in the introduction or the conclusion. My preference is that you do so in the introduction. Ultimately, I would like for you to make sure that you have clearly stated your thesis and demonstrate that you understand the complexity of the prompt that is being asked. So that is how you would get the first point in the rubric. Now, the second point in the rubric is contextualization. This is where you describe a broader historical context that is relevant to the prompt. For many of us, we will simply refer to this as our background paragraph. Provide the reader with that you understand what is going on in the broader picture. So this is 1607 to 1750. This is specific to religious freedom, but what other issues are going on in American history during this time period? Please note, you will not get the point for simply one phrase. This needs to be a well-developed paragraph, and we will talk about organization of the essay momentarily. Now, the next 2 points is for evidence. Are you able to support your argument that you have used with specific examples from history? If you use those examples, you will get 1 point. If you're able to identify, and there's no specific number, I know many of you are going to ask, well, how many pieces of evidence do we have to provide? I can't offer that because the College Board doesn't offer that. So there just needs to be enough evidence and historical examples to get the first point. Now, the second point is not only do you have the evidence, but you're able to incorporate it into an argument in response to the prompt. That's the higher level analysis that I hope all of you will eventually reach. That's 4 of the 6 points. Your last the last 2 points for the 6 points is your analysis and reasoning. So have you demonstrated a complex understanding of the historical development? Have you been able to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument? So in these final 2 points, the first point will be earned if the response demonstrates the use of historical reasoning to frame or structure an argument. So whether it is a change over time essay, whether it is a cause and effect or periodization, which I'm not sure if they're still using that terminology, but have you demonstrated that you understand the argument? The second point is really, it says here, it could be accomplished in a variety of ways. So I actually listed all of them. If you explain the nuance of an issue by analyzing multiple variables, do you explain both the similarity and the differences? Do you explain the continuity and the change? Do you explain multiple causes? Do you explain multiple causes and effects? Do you explain relevant and insightful connections within and across different time periods, which you can't do for this essay? Can you confirm the validity of an argument by corroborating multiple perspectives across themes? So what I'm basically going to try to tell you here is, if you understand the time period and you can write a well-organized essay, you will have a very good chance of meeting this criteria. A lot of this, the verbiage here, it's more complicated than it needs to be. I want you all to be able to demonstrate that you understand the question. So, with that being said, your first paragraph should provide a clear thesis. It would not be a bad idea to lead into your thesis. I always like to tell kids, just write what's happening prior to the time period in the opening and then lead into. So since this is 1607, We can talk about the founding of Jamestown. We could even talk about the failed effort at Roanoke leading into the founding of Jamestown. That would be one good way to open your paragraph. We're going to have plenty of time in class to talk about this, so I'll save that for later on. Now, in your second paragraph, this is where you are going to need to demonstrate that you have a strong understanding of the background of the time period. So try to position the question in the broader context of American history. What is happening during this time period? Sorry, I need to change that. And you will get this point if you have a good detailed paragraph about colonial history, specifically, because it's Britain, British North American colonies. All right, now is where you have to make a decision. Your body paragraphs, how do you want to approach the analysis and the evidence in this essay? So specific to this one, you have the New England colonies, the Mid-Atlantic colonies, the Chesapeake colonies, the Southern colonies. One approach is to go regionally, geographically. Now another approach is by level of tolerance. So do you want to go with first the most tolerant colonies, then those colonies that were somewhat tolerant, and then those colonies that were not tolerant religiously? And then a third approach is chronologically. Now, normally I would say go chronologically, other than for the colonial period. I do not think this is something that would be easy for you to do. So I think the choice is, do you want to go regionally, or would you like to go with the level of tolerance? For the sake of this review, I went regionally. Does not mean that you can't clearly adapt it to go in this direction as well, as you will see. So I just want to reiterate this for everybody. Your first paragraph is your opening with a strong thesis statement. This is where you want to lead into the argument. Again, my advice is maybe begin with a sentence about the failed lost colony at Roanoke, then the successful founding of Jamestown, followed by Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay, and then a clear thesis statement, or two sentences, which demonstrates the level of religious freedom that existed in the British North American colonies. And then your second paragraph is where you're going to provide some background information about colonization. And what was the approach of the British, what obstacles were they contending with, so on and so forth. Okay, we went through the different approaches you can take, so now let's just do a little historical review. If we were to start with the New England colonies, has to begin with Massachusetts. The first two colonies, Plymouth 1620 and Massachusetts Bay 1629, were both efforts to promote religion, but they were slightly different in the sense that the first colonists at Plymouth, they were separatists. They were clearly looking to break away from the Church of England. I think they originally tried to settle in the Netherlands, but they were concerned that their children were becoming too Dutchified by Dutch culture. And then they made it to North America and settled at Plymouth Rock. And then the next group were settling in Massachusetts Bay, but they were not separatists. They were not looking to break away. They simply were looking for a place where they could become the envy of the world. They wanted to show that their colony would be the height of, religious, with no separation of church and state. And their leader, John Winthrop, one of his very famous speeches, A City Upon a Hill, demonstrates these views, that the Massachusetts Bay Colony was going to be the envy of the world. But there was no tolerance for any other religious views. Either you were a member of the church and a member of the colony, or you weren't going to be welcome there. So any non-Puritans were not allowed in, not allowed to vote if they were there, and yet they were still going to have to pay a tax to support the colony. All religious and political activity took place in the town meeting house for Massachusetts Bay, and it was a very strict puritanical culture. No drinking, no card playing, no dancing. Those of you that learned about the Calvinists in possibly AP European history or world history, that's the following of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, other facts that you would definitely want to include in a section on the Massachusetts Bay, in addition to John Winthrop's City Upon a Hill speech, you should know about the Halfway Covenant. The second and third generation simply wasn't as religious And because you had to be a member of the church to be a member of the colony, this was going to be a problem for the future of Massachusetts Bay. So the Halfway Covenant basically told younger members that they could still be a member of the colony even if they don't go through their full conversion experience, explaining how they reached their positive religious view of society. In addition, you can mention Harvard College, first college in America, 1636. This was specifically to train young men to become ministers. And then later, we go to the 1730s, again, this feeling that people are losing their passion for religion. Jonathan Edwards is one of the leaders of the Great Awakening, in which he is going to try to scare colonists into becoming more religious. And one of his famous sermons, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, is something that we will read this week. So that's it from Massachusetts Bay. Now the other New England colonies, Rhode Island and Connecticut, offer some different views. Rhode Island is the place where anybody who was banished from Massachusetts Bay was kicked out to. And Providence became the center of this colonial activity. Two famous people, one is Roger Williams and the other is Anne Hutchinson. Roger Williams specifically went against the concept of the separation of church and state, which obviously is something that John Winthrop did not support, and is the specific reason why he was banished along with his followers to Rhode Island. Anne Hutchinson might even be more controversial. This is a lady who was holding prayer meetings in her basement. So there's two problems there. Number one, she's not a man, and number two, she wasn't approved by John Winthrop as a church leader. So she was considered an antinomian, going against the teachings of the church, and they actually put her on trial for heresy. And during this trial, she was able to answer every biblical question that was thrown at her. It was quite an impressive showing from a religious knowledge standpoint. Unfortunately for Anne Hutchinson, when she claimed that God communicated directly with her, that is when Winthrop and the other leaders of Massachusetts Bay kicked her out. She also went to Rhode Island, later traveled down to New York. Some of you may have heard of the Hutchinson River Parkway, a road you've probably been on, named after her, and tragically she was killed by Native Americans while coming down to New York. Rhode Island is one of the two most tolerant colonies for all religions. Catholics, Jews welcome as well, and a very progressive, at the time, colony. Connecticut, you really don't need to know much about Connecticut. It was formed originally from the Hartford and New Haven settlements, but it is a much more strict colony, not to the level of John Winthrop's Massachusetts Bay, but still didn't really welcome other religions. And there was even a law that said that if you sweared at one's mother or father, you could be punished by death. So that's it for the New England colonies. I didn't mention New Hampshire because I don't know anything about New Hampshire. So now we're going to go to the Mid-Atlantic colonies, sometimes referred to as the breadbasket colonies. Here we have the second most tolerant colony, right up there with Rhode Island, and that's Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn. He referred to it as the Holy Experiment. Now, during the English Civil War, I believe 1642 to 1660, there was a man, George Fox, who was walking across the countryside, devastated and traumatized by the carnage and the dead bodies that appeared everywhere. And this sparked in him the desire to create his own religion called the Society of Friends, more formally known as the Quakers. Any of you who play Friends Academy in sports, Friends Academy is a Quaker school, and that is their team nickname. The Quakers believed in treating all people equally. At the time, they were opposed to war, treated African Americans equally, women fairly, believed in peace with Native Americans, a very loving religion. And Pennsylvania, which translates into Penn's Woods, was an area of land that was given to William Penn for Quakers to populate. This experiment was also welcome to all different religions. Sadly for William Penn, he's dealt with tremendous financial struggles, and many people think just died penniless and didn't get to see the full development of his colony. New Jersey and Delaware are simply an extension of Pennsylvania, both inhabited by Quakers and allowed some level of religious tolerance. Of all of these, New York was the least tolerant of the middle colonies. Quakers were persecuted in this area, which is why many of them moved to New Jersey. But that was mostly when it was a Dutch colony, when it was called New Amsterdam. When the Duke of York and the British took it over, the religious restrictions were lifted, and it made it a little bit more tolerant, but New York was far more concerned about economic growth than it was about religion. Now we go to the Chesapeake colonies, and this is where Virginia and Maryland play the primary role. Virginia, as we know, originally Jamestown was the first successful British colony in North America, but they were really motivated almost exclusively for economic reasons. Religion really played a very small role, if any, in the development of the Virginia colony. Maryland, on the other hand, is quite different. Maryland was a land grant to Cecilius Calvert, who was also referred to as Lord Baltimore. There are actually two Lord Baltimores, for those of you who studied that for our project. This is the son, and it was specifically a colony for Catholics. Unfortunately for the Catholics, many Protestants moved into the region, and it led to a major conflict over control of a local chapel. So rather than allowing them to continue to fight, the local government decided to pass the Religious Act of Toleration in 1649. This allowed for freedom of religion for all Christians, but it did not allow for freedom of religion for non-Christians. As a matter of fact, the death penalty was the sentence for those individuals. So Maryland is more in the category of being somewhat tolerant. And then we go to the southern colonies, and North and South Carolina are going to be referred to as the Restoration colonies. This is more of an AP Euro topic as well. This was following the English Civil War, when the Stuart monarchy was restored to the throne. This would be under Charles II, and religion is not a major role in either of these colonies. And then we have Georgia, the final of the 13 British colonies, founded in 1733 by James Oglethorpe as its leader, and it had two purposes. First, it was a buffer colony between Spanish Florida and the Carolinas, but then it was also a place for people who were in debt to relocate and try to start their lives up. And the church was the Anglican Church, but interestingly enough, Georgia did also allow Jews to practice freely. On a side note, Georgia actually banned slavery initially, which some of us may find a little bit ironic given what we know about the cause of the Civil War. The only religion that was not welcome in Georgia was Catholicism. So that's a nice little summary for all of the colonies and the level of religious toleration. If you go back, or if I go back rather, to the different approaches, I went regionally. But as you can see, you could also go with the most tolerant colonies, being Rhode Island and Pennsylvania, then the somewhat tolerant colonies, Maryland, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, and Georgia, and those that were not tolerant at all, Massachusetts and Connecticut. Certainly don't think anybody should be doing a chronological approach to this. When you get to the conclusion, the only rubric the old rubric required students to provide a synthesis. It no longer does, which I'm a little bit sad about because I did like this part of the rubric. It used to ask you to take the question and then use the theme of the question and address another time period where something similar happened. So I haven't really spoken to Ms. Dearlam or Ms. Canone yet about how we're going to approach the absence of the synthesis, but I still think it's a great way to conclude your essay. I think two things. First, it's great to briefly write what happens next. So for the purposes of this essay, the French and Indian War is what happens next, and the tensions between the colonists and the British Crown. But you could also maybe just connect religion to another time period. Now, I know that I haven't taught you any of this yet, so you may want to simply go with what role you believe religion plays in American society today. But this is absolutely dependent on how much time you have to finish the essay. So we are going to, I don't know when you're watching this video, but we're going to work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in class on understanding the colonial era and also giving you time to ask questions about this essay, and we'll either write it on Friday or on Tuesday, depending on how comfortable we feel. Hopefully you took notes. I probably spoke too quickly, and I apologize for that, although I think that there is a... you could probably get the transcript as you're watching it and pause me as much as possible. All right, that's it. I'll shut up. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.